This podcast is made possible by listener members of Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nashvillager Podcast. It's October 27th, 2025. 40 years ago today, a gang of thieves stole $20 million worth of art from a Paris museum. I mean, talk about echoes of the recent heist that took historic jewels from the Louvre, right? But back in 1985, the target was, and I'm not sure I'm going to pronounce this correctly, the Musée Marmottan Monet, and the items taken were Impressionist paintings, some of them masterworks by Monet, Renoir, and others. In fact, one of them was the painting that gave the whole artistic movement its name. It was called Impression, Sunrise. This was major stuff. But forget about all the heist scenes you've seen in movies with guys all in black doing all sorts of maneuvers to avoid setting off a security system. This heist was way more brazen than that. It happened first thing in the morning, just after the alarms had been disarmed for the day, and they held guards at gunpoint while taking the paintings off the wall. Authorities assumed the paintings must have been stolen by an organized crime ring, but because they were far too famous to sell on the open market, investigators worked on the theory that some big boss who wanted the bragging rights of having real masterworks hanging on his wall ordered the theft. But the break came when an unemployed bartender on the French island of Corsica showed someone photos of the paintings. And so, 5 years later, they were recovered from a Corsican apartment. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with historical context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. When I think about stolen art and Nashville, the first thing that comes to my mind admittedly stretches the boundaries of the vocabulary. Art may not be the right word for this object, but it was beloved when it was on display. And when it was stolen, a lot of people in this city were truly upset. I'm talking, of course, about the nun bun. Please tell me you've heard of it. I may have talked about it on this podcast before, so if I'm repeating myself, forgive me. The thing is, I'm not sure anything quite captures the essence of who we were as Nashvillians in the late 90s and early aughts as our collective delight with the Bongo Java cinnamon roll that accidentally came out of the oven looking just like Mother Teresa. It was just a silly little thing, a little quirky, a lot goofy, and everyone here was ready to just have fun with it, you know? The folks at the coffee shop preserved the pastry with a coat of shellac, put it in a display box, and sold merch emblazoned with the words, Immaculate Confection. The world took notice. It got shared around all kinds of news outlets. But the real Mother Teresa was not amused. So out of respect, people stopped specifically mentioning her or using this slightly sacrilegious wording on the merch, and we just all called it the nun bun. And then on Christmas morning of 2005, it was stolen, never to be seen again. There have, of course, been examples of true art theft here through the years. Just 3 years ago, paintings intended for display at the National Museum of African American Music in downtown Nashville were taken from that museum's mailroom. A mobile art gallery called The Box was stolen off a street in East Nashville in 2019. In 2017, the actor Shia LaBeouf, working with a pair of conceptual artists, erected a flagpole in Greenville, Tennessee, to fly an anti-Trump banner with the words, He will not divide us. They displayed the flag already in New York City and Amsterdam, but their plan was to have it in an undisclosed place for the duration of President Trump's time in office with a live video stream of it online. And I assume putting it in a community that is very Republican was part of the artistic statement, too. Well, it went over about as well as you'd expect. The flag was stolen by someone who replaced it with a red MAGA hat and a pro-Trump T-shirt. But perhaps the most odd story of an art heist in Tennessee took place in Johnson City. And let's be honest, I'm back to sort of stretching the vocabulary, but come along with me here. That's where two women walked into an Arby's, and while one kept the staff busy by ordering a meal, the other helped herself to $500 worth of decor items from the recently renovated dining room, just taking things right off the wall. From the descriptions, it sounds like this was one of those fast food locations where the franchise owner decided to make things a little more homey than usual. You know, go buy home goods and pick up some mass-produced art and hang it on the narrow strips of wall between the giant windows. That way there's something to look at other than the reverse side of the giant posters in those windows. In this case, that extra decor included paintings of fruit and some kind of metal sign. And like I said, this woman just walked around taking things off the walls while her friend ordered food. They thought far enough ahead to create a distraction, but seemingly didn't think through things beyond that. The friend paid using a card, not cash. So when the manager saw everything on the security footage, she was able to go back in the system, pull up the card information, and give it to the police. The thieves were easily identified and ended up in a detention center. The flip side of all of these stories is at Nashville's Parthenon. It is perhaps our city's epicenter of the ongoing debate over institutional art theft. And by that, I mean museums holding on to art that many believe was stolen from other cultures during times of colonization and conquest. The Parthenon is, of course, a full-size replica of the ancient temple in Athens. And up on the main floor, there are high-quality plaster casts of the remnants of statues that were created for the pediments of the original Parthenon and that stood in those pediments for centuries. The original marble statues have been on display in the British Museum for more than 2 centuries now. The Greek government wants them back. And quite frankly, Nashville is the place where you can currently enjoy the treat of seeing the artistry of those sculptures up close without having to feel conflicted about the ethics of looking at it in that place. That said, down on the lower level, Nashville's Parthenon is also a general art museum. That's in keeping with the structure's local heritage. The first iteration of it was built as the Fine Arts Building for the Tennessee Centennial Exposition back in the 1890s. And in fact, the Parthenon has one of the more significant art collections in our city. Through the years, those holdings came to include nearly 250 examples of pre-conquest art from across the Americas. That kind of art rarely makes its way to wealthy nations like the U.S. through legitimate means. There's a long history of people feeling entitled to just take valuable cultural artifacts from countries like Mexico without any kind of official approval. So not too long ago, the museum began the work of repatriating the art that had ended up in the Parthenon's collection. Last year, those items were given a farewell exhibition there before being sent back home. They're now in the collection of the Institute of Anthropology and History in Mexico City. In just a few minutes, investigation meets collaboration. That's coming up after the newscast.
I've been thinking a lot about symbiotic relationships recently.
Because the fungus can do something that the oak tree can't. So it's a mutually convenient arrangement.
Maybe that's because I spend most of my days partaking in one. The symbiotic relationship between Nashville Public Radio and you. I'm Metro reporter Cynthia Abrams. On our end, we provide the service of reliable, informative news coverage.
Tennessee's ongoing heat wave is one for the record books.
Explosions happen fairly often.
Whichever primary you're voting in, you'll need to bring a driver's license or a passport.
All this, and it's free to the community. There is no paywall. Wondering how we can do this? It's with your support. That's the thing about symbiotic relationships. They rely on each other. So when you give because you value our service, we're able to keep going. Visit WPLN.org to make your fall gift today.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. New details have emerged about the massive explosion which left 16 dead at Accurate Energetic Systems earlier this month. Officials held a press conference Friday sharing that federal authorities are finishing an early part of their investigation. The experts, including chemists, engineers, and explosive specialists, found that more than 24,000 pounds of explosives detonated in the blast. So far, they've identified the remains of 14 of the 16 victims through rapid DNA testing. 2 people still remain unaccounted for. They also found where the explosion originated and have several hypotheses about the cause, but are not yet sharing them.
The evidence collected from the scene will be analyzed, examined, and tested, where the scene analysis and evidence-based explanations of what could cause the explosion will be researched, tested, and retested through the scientific process. Those results don't come quickly. They come through time, care, and precision. And that's what this community deserves, answers that are proven, not guessed.
That was Jamie Van Fleet, a special agent in charge for ATF's Nashville Field Division. He said there's no indication of a threat to public safety. Tennessee's Attorney General is among 25 in the nation challenging the idea of automatic birthright citizenship in the 14th Amendment. Jonathan Scrimetti joined an amicus brief to the Supreme Court arguing that the immigration status of a parent should be a factor. He says early interpretations of the 14th Amendment after the Civil War gave citizenship to children if their parents had legal status. President Donald Trump has led the charge against birthright citizenship. The latest multi-state filing drew immediate reactions, including condemnation from the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition. The group calls the move a racist attack on an area of law that has been settled for more than 125 years. Since 2023, a lawsuit challenging Tennessee's abortion ban has been underway. Lawyers for the state have been working to get it dismissed. This month, judges said no, move forward, and go to trial. Two groups filed the lawsuit together, patients who were denied emergency abortions in Tennessee and doctors who fear going to jail for performing those kinds of abortions. They say the law's medical exceptions are too vague. WPLN health reporter Catherine Sweeney gives us the latest.
The arguments really got into the nitty-gritty. Long story short, the state's attorneys argued the lawsuit has become irrelevant, in part because lawmakers tweaked the abortion ban's language earlier this year. The court shot down most of those arguments. The two sides are also fighting about discovery, basically how many records the state has to turn over. Plaintiffs are trying to get a look at emails and other communication between the governor, the health department, lawmakers, and state lawyers about the abortion ban. That would include any deaths that could be associated and records about abortions denied in Tennessee since the ban took effect. The state argued the request was too broad and difficult. The court said the state will have to provide most of those records. The case is expected to go to trial sometime next year. Catherine Sweeney, WPLN News.
Tennessee had the highest rate of opioid use disorders last year. It's not a surprise. The opioid epidemic has plagued the state for years, and the new data from Fair Health's opioid tracker shows that the challenge only continues. Axios reports that according to the data, Tennessee's diagnosis rate has skyrocketed since 2021, and last year the rate had reached 1,447 people diagnosed out of every 100,000. That's nearly triple the national figure. The state has started to fund opioid prevention efforts using dollars from lawsuit settlements with drug manufacturers, pharmacies, and other parties found culpable in the cases. Tennessee's leading physician through the COVID pandemic says public health has taken a concerning turn since her return to the private sector. Dr. Lisa Piercy says she learned hard lessons and that whether talking about masks, distancing, or vaccines, public trust depends on transparency from public officials.
Telling what you know and what you don't know is the most important. And I think public health today has become polarized into serving one voice or another, and it's lost that transparency. And I think that is to the detriment of patients and the public.
Since leaving government service, Piercy has entered a new chapter. She's raising money to buy small healthcare companies that have potential to grow. She talks about physician leadership in the business of healthcare and lessons from her time as Tennessee's health commissioner on today's episode of This is Nashville. Well, as the government nears a month of closure, Tennessee Head Start programs are growing concerned. If the government fails to open before November 1st, the federal funds that support about 250 of the state's poorest kids are in jeopardy. That's because nearly 10% of the nation's Head Start programs, which help provide nutrition, education, and healthcare services to very young, low-income children, are at risk of shutting down. In Tennessee, it's 267 child care and early education slots in the Clarksville area that are at risk. The Tennessean reports 56 Head Start staff members would also face furloughs. The state's Head Start director said the loss of funding would be traumatic for children as they would lose the wraparound services provided by the Head Start Center. Not only that, many parents will not have a, quote, stable and safe place to send their children while they work. The program is looking to see if it's possible to rearrange finances or take out a line of credit to support children until Congress reopens. Head Start is not the only way Tennesseans are impacted by the government shutdown. Nearly 700,000 Tennesseans will not receive federal food aid benefits next month if it continues. State officials say they will not step in to fund the difference. Millions of eyes were on Vanderbilt this weekend as the Commodores continued their momentous football season. The team beat Mizzou 17-10 in a game that Vanderbilt's coach called an ugly win. The team's hype is picked up after their win earlier this month against LSU. That propelled Vanderbilt into the Associated Press top 10 rankings for the first time since 1947, and it encouraged the team to launch a Heisman Trophy campaign for quarterback Diego Pavia. Meanwhile, the campus was abuzz much of the weekend with thousands of students packing in for the live ESPN College Game Day broadcast. That's where student Tyler Huang won $500,000 for himself and $250,000 for charity by kicking a 33-yard field goal. Huang won the raffle by being among the first to arrive and line up. He said he had experience kicking footballs and made a kick that the broadcasters described as one of the best ever on College Game Day. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. It is fall fundraising time at Nashville Public Radio, and as a reminder of just what your money supports when you give to the station, we're dipping back into the archives today for a story that aired earlier this year. It's an example of the kind of investigative work that WPLN's criminal justice reporter Paige Flager does for us all the time. Now, one thing you may not realize from the outside looking in is just how enthusiastic Paige is about collaboration. One of her favorite things to do in the newsroom is to organize a time when any and all reporters digging into stats or making freedom of information requests from government agencies can all get together and help each other out. That kind of stuff can be daunting, but it's also the bread and butter of her work, and she's game to offer advice and handy tips to anyone who's feeling stuck. And for a while now, she's had a great partnership through the nonprofit news organization ProPublica with another reporter, Elia Swaby. They've done extensive reporting on the way kids are treated by the juvenile justice system in this state. A few weeks ago, Paige got a call from a new reporter in Memphis asking if she had any leads on detention centers in that community. And of course, Paige helped her out. And once that reporter's work was done, Paige facilitated a Q&A I did with that reporter to get her very fine work to you on our air and through this podcast. Of course, collaboration is the very heart of public broadcasting. Nothing we do could happen without our community of listeners who take that important step to be true partners, giving financial donations to pay for folks like Paige to do that work and share it with us all. You can make your gift right now at WPLN.org. All that said, let's listen right now to an example of reporting collaboration. This story aired a few weeks after 17-year-old Solomon Henderson walked into the Antioch High School cafeteria with a gun. Prior to that incident, authorities in Tennessee were alerted to his threatening and violent behavior. Paige and Aliyah dug into the records to see whether authorities heeded the warning signs.
In 2020, Solomon Henderson was just 13 when his mom called the police on him for punching her in the face. Clarksville police charged him with simple assault, according to an incident report that ProPublica and WPLN obtained through a records request.
In 2023, Nashville police officers visited the family's home and said they removed 2 guns. A police department spokesperson said the guns belonged to adults in the home, but the incident report could not be released because the visit involved a minor.
In 2024, Henderson pulled a knife on a 15-year-old girl at school. Jemima, a sophomore at Antioch, told school administrators and police that Henderson threatened her in the cafeteria. We're just using Jemima's first name because she's a minor. Henderson was charged with reckless endangerment and was suspended for 2 days.
He had a whole knife in school, and he didn't get expelled. It just doesn't sit right with me because they acted like the situation never happened after.
Then, in January, Henderson came to school with a pistol. He fired 10 shots in 20 seconds in the cafeteria, killing 16-year-old Jocelyn Correa Escalante before he turned the gun on himself.
It's unclear how many of Henderson's red flags officials paid attention to. Nashville police declined to comment, but indicated they didn't know about the assault charges in Clarksville. School officials declined to say whether they considered incidents from his past when determining his suspension.
Henderson's suspension for threatening another student with a weapon stands in stark contrast to other, far harsher penalties students have faced under a series of recently passed state laws designed to prevent school shootings and crack down on hoax threats.
For nearly a year, Aaliyah and I have reported on how kids are being expelled from school and charged with felonies for jokes, rumors, and misunderstandings, even when they don't pose a valid threat.
And the cases we've looked at are indicative of the broader discrepancies in Tennessee's approach to stopping violence in schools. Lawmakers have insisted harsh punishment is necessary to deter students from making hoax threats.
But lawyers and judges, like juvenile court judge Sheila Calloway, say it floods the justice system with cases that could be handled at school, making it harder to focus on the real dangers.
Anytime when you have a influx of cases that are threats or conversations that have to be investigated, I think it does take away valuable resources for the actual real cases that we need it for.
School officials and police in Tennessee are required by law to work together on what are called threat assessment teams. They're tasked with investigating cases where students show dangerous or threatening behavior so that they can intervene before a situation escalates. Melissa Nelson is a school safety and security consultant who has trained thousands of school employees on managing threats.
When we aren't using evidence-based practices and we don't have a good framework of specific things we should be looking for, asking about, then we do have a very high potential of missing warning signs, missing risk factors that we could be addressing before a weapon's in a school, before a kill list is created.
Metro Nashville Public Schools declined to comment on whether they completed a threat assessment in Henderson's case. If school staff and police did complete one, they would have been required to consider Henderson's history of violence and risk of future aggression. They also would have had to decide how to address any concerns they had about Henderson, like randomly checking his backpack or locker and helping him to get counseling.
The way the district handled Henderson's behavior has frustrated Jemima and her family. The family made the decision to not go to court in the case against Henderson. It's a decision that her mom, Patricia Larime, said she now regrets.
I should have gone to court with him because maybe that day we would have given him help. But I felt like Mitchell failed him.
Jemima said she feels like the district's lack of action could have resulted in her being one of Henderson's victims.
Y'all failed me and y'all failed everybody else in the school. And I just feel like the situation should have been handled differently.
Aaliyah Swaby
and Paige Flager, WPLN News.
That story originally aired in February, and it's just one of many examples of the stellar investigative work and collaborative reporting done by WPLN's Paige Flager. It's what you support when you give at WPLN.org, along with this daily roundup of Nashville news on the Nashville Villager podcast. This is our annual fall fundraising time. It is, of course, taking on a different level of importance and intensity after the dismantling of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. But with your donations, with your monetary vote for truth-telling and curiosity and sharing information across the community, we're going to have a bright future for a long time yet. So thank you for your support. The place to give online is WPLN.org. And as always, let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.